Hi everybody. We've been through some pretty difficult years for our party and our state and our nation. But I think that we're all beginning to sense that dawn is breaking, and that if our party this time stands by its word and on its principles, it won't be long before it is morning again in America. You know, 2008 was not the result of Americans deciding that somehow socialism is going to work better here than everywhere else it's been tried. It wasn't because voters abandoned Republican principles. It's because they believed Republicans had abandoned Republican principles. We spent altogether too much time asking if our nominees could be elected, and not nearly enough time asking what would they do if we got them elected. And so our party and our state and our nation suffered an era of Republicans in name only, who dishonored every principle our party stands for and who broke every promise they made in our party's name. They promised to cut up the credit card, stop the crazy deficit spending, cut taxes, and secure our borders. And we got them elected. And they did exactly the opposite. In Washington, Republicans in name only increased spending at twice the rate that we saw under Bill Clinton. They ran up the biggest peacetime deficits in our nation's history. They imposed the biggest entitlement program since the Great Society. And they left our nation's borders wide open. In Sacramento, Republicans in name only increased spending faster than Gray Davis, imposed the biggest tax increase and the most economically destructive regulations by any state in American history, and literally ran California off a fiscal cliff. The bad news is that Americans voted against John McCain because they wanted to avoid George W. Bush's third term. The good news is that they're starting to realize that they've ended up with something even worse: Jimmy Carter's second term. Abraham Lincoln said, if the voters get their backsides too close to the fire, they'll just have to sit on the blisters a while. It's a painful experience, but it's a learning experience. And they emerge from that experience sadder and wiser, and in time for the next election. We've already seen that awakening in Massachusetts and New Jersey and Virginia. We've seen it in Obama's cratering popularity. We've seen it in the growing Tea Party movement. We've seen it in the utter disarray among the Democrats in Congress. They may control the White House and overwhelming majorities in both houses of the Congress and most of the media and all of the labor bosses, but they have lost the American people. You know, Frank Luntz visited our House Republican conference a few months ago to talk about health care. But before he began, he became very serious and sober. He looked every congressman in the eye, and then he said, before I get to the subject today, I need to tell you guys something. I've spent the last 3 months looking at polling data from congressional districts across this country. You are going to be in the majority next year. This time, for God's sake, please don't screw it up again. Well, that's why the CRA has never been more important than it is right now. You kept the conservative movement alive during the dark years of the Bush administration in Washington and the Schwarzenegger administration in Sacramento. Here in California, the strongest voice in opposition to these charlatans was right here in this room, the California Republican Assembly. We've got our heaviest lifting yet ahead of us. We Republicans haven't earned a second chance, but it looks like the American people are going to give us one anyway. This time, we've got to earn it. This time, the future of our state and our country rests with the decisions that we Republicans make on whom to nominate in the next few months. Here in California, we're in grave danger of nominating the same team of Republicans in name only who bankrupted California and crushed our economy with the biggest tax increases and the heaviest regulations in history. We cannot allow that to happen again. And the CRA is what stands in the breach. We no longer have the benefit of the doubt or a margin for error. We've got to nominate Republicans that we can trust to stand and fight for the principles of individual freedom and limited government that define our party. There are many races for statewide and legislative office where we will decide whether the Republican nominees will proudly stand for our principles or do everything they can to undermine them. That's a great deal to do, and we don't have much time. Let's make every one of these next 90 days count. They're literally the days that will make or break our party our state, and ultimately our country. Now is the time to paint our positions in bold colors and not hide them in pale pastels. Now is the time to win this one for the Gipper.